I'm just going to start off by thanking all of you for being here. We've got panelists from 4 different time zones, and it's really a pleasure to have you all here to have this discussion. And thank you to all the attendees joining us. They're all slowly coming in, and you know, it's Thursday night, so thank you for all of you for coming. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Tanya, and I'm the co-founder and education leader for EYEYAH. And since 2017, we've been working with amazing digital artists, the likes of Jim and Angie, who are here, to create visual conversations around hot topics such as internet safety, sustainability, and the topic we're focusing on today, which is mental health. Just to set a bit of context about anxiety in children. Even before the pandemics, the stats are quite alarming. 1 in 5 children has a mental health disorder. And as a parent myself, I know the importance of fostering open conversations, but it isn't always that easy. And in fact, teachers have told us that they find it very difficult to broach the subject with students. This session is focused on the power of art and illustration to engage children and adults in conversations and education about topics like mental health. And as a very wise psychotherapist who hopefully is here listening today, she told me, visuals speak straight to the subconscious. So I'm going to thank this amazing panel again, and I'll be introducing them one by one. So we've got 4 different time zones here. So I'll go through these panelists. So Amy Herman is an author, art historian, and lawyer, and she's the creator of The Art of Perception. Her book, Visual Intelligence, really opened my eyes as to how a questioning technique can be used to make people observe, interpret, and analyze a piece of art. She's worked with the likes of the FBI and the military to help them get better at their jobs by learning to see. So welcome, Amy. Jim Stoughton, so otherwise known as Jim the Illustrator, is a UK-based illustrator whose work has been published in the likes of The Guardian, and he frequently exhibits around the world. He's one of the contributors to our anxiety issue, and as you'll see later, his illustration is so rich in anxiety, and yet I personally can't stop smiling every time I look at it. Welcome, Jim. Michelle Harrell is Director of Education at the North Carolina Museum of Art. She gave a wonderful TED Talk many years ago about visual literacy, but it's still so relevant today. She's a former art teacher, and today she explores how learning through art can support social and emotional learning. Ayn is an art teacher and one of our early followers of EYEYAH, and it's really thanks to her that we saw the potential of EYEYAH as an education tool, and she's contributed to many of our educational toolkits. Angie is a Singapore-based illustrator, and she's also one of our regular contributors. She's the creator of the wonderful illustration behind me, and her detailed works always connect with kids and adults alike. And finally, Steve Lawler is my co-founder and creative director of EYEYAH. We've been working together for the past 15 years, and he's really the one who introduced me to visual communications and publishing. This issue of EYEYAH is actually our 26th publication, and it's actually the one with the most text, because we've used text as triggers and prompts throughout to aid with understanding the artworks. And there's going to be a chance after each of the presenters to ask questions. So please do put them in the Q&A, and we'll address them at the end. So I will hand over to Amy.
Well, thank you very much, Tanya. It's really an honor to be here. And before I share my screen to show some slides, I just wanted to say that the power of looking at art and visual images, I realized later in my career, really resonates with children. And I've adapted visual intelligence for young adults in a book called Smart, Use Your Eyes to Boost Your Brain. And we've adapted visual intelligence for this new book for young adults that basically, it's a guide for adults, 3 goals. how to see, how to think about what we see, and how to talk about what we see. And so when it comes to anxiety, I think those are three, it's a good platform and foundation to think about talking about what it is that we observe. So what I'm going to do is share my screen and just run through a very few slides to talk about my methodology and how it can be applied to thinking about not only observing, but how do we articulate what it is that we observe when it comes to anxiety in children and mental health in general. And my opening slide, Seeing What Matters, is a painting by the South African artist Philip Barlow. And if your instinct is to rub your eyes to bring it into focus, it's doing its job. I think it's a compelling visual reminder that when it comes to mental health, we have to constantly bring the world into focus because it's a dynamic situation. It's an internal situation, it's an external situation. We have to be able to view all of our resources as a dynamic world and how we can use them to improve a situation. Because this is not a sustainable situation. This is what I call the deer in the headlights. And if I've learned anything during the pandemic, you can find an image of anything on the internet. And a deer in the headlights, quite simply, is not a sustainable situation. When we find out that there's an issue, we can't let it paralyze us. We have to think about looking at our resources differently to begin to put the pieces in place to solve the problem. And the first one, believe it or not, it sounds counterintuitive, is to pause, to stop, to look, and to listen. Because if we run right into an issue, we're not able to formulate and articulate to the best of our ability what it is that we observe. And if you look at the slide that I've put up on the screen, and you just take a few seconds to look at it, you realize very quickly the horses are standing still and the water is moving, not the other way around. And as the journalist Frank Bruni wrote about the power of a pause, he said, a pause is when passions cool, civility gets oxygen, and wisdom finds its wings. So the idea of pausing when we have an issue, when we're dealing with anxiety, is to stop, look, and listen and take stock of the situation before reaching out and bringing in all these resources. The second concept that I wanted to introduce was the idea of reconciling the big picture and the small details. Sometimes we get so mired on the small details that we lose the big picture of what it is that we're looking at. And I'm showing you the artwork of Joana Vasconcelos, and she's a Portuguese artist, and I saw this work of art in Bilbao. And just to show you how human we are, I walked into the gallery and I was so taken with her craftsmanship and her artisanship. But she made all of those mirrors and she crafted them that I never stepped back to see that together they make a Venetian eye mask. I just never saw it. So I want to remind all the participants that when we're focusing on an issue or a problem, we need to step back from it physically and literally to remember the big picture so that we can articulate our observations of the big picture and the small details. And the third concept, which is important for all of us in all aspects of our lives, is the Latin phrase festina lente, to make haste slowly. And this 1872 painting by the Bigland brothers illustrates the idea that we all want to cross the finish line. We all want to solve our problems. We all want to offer help, but we need to do it in synchronicity with others. Mental health and children's anxiety is a very complex issue, and we can't do it alone. And if we just rush to the fastest solution, we're often going to have to start again. So the Bigland brothers, their oars have to be in synchronicity. They have to communicate with each other the whole length of the race. It's not just about crossing the finish line. It's about doing it mindfully. And when it comes to children's anxiety and mental health, we have to pool our resources and be in synchronicity with experts to really address the problem in a holistic way. And what I hope to do today, just in a very short period of time before I take any questions, is I use art to enhance observation, perception, and communication skills, but I'm also tailoring it to help in my new book, to help with problem solving. And this work of art illustrates what I try to do with my participants and readers. This is a barn in southeastern Michigan here in the States, and the owner was worried about it. It was becoming derelict, and I want you to think of it as a problem that we're trying to address. So she didn't know about the future of the barn, so she called in a team of artists and architects, and they came in, and the project was called The Secret Sky. And what the architects did is they removed a single acute angle from foundation to roof to let light come in a different way. They maintained the structural integrity of the barn, and this was the result. And what's so interesting about the project is not only did they consider what the barn would look like in one dimension, they thought about it at sunrise and sunset and inclement weather. And I think most ingeniously, and again, applicable to thinking about anxiety in children, they put solar powered panels on the interior of the barn. So at night, one could see the infrastructure and the interior of the barn in a way that nobody else could during the day. And what I try to do with my clients and participants is, and I hope today what you'll come away from this conference is to cut a piece out of your evening, just cut a piece out to let light in a different way, to put the issue of children's anxiety in a different light, to not just think of it as a one-dimensional issue, but to be able to engage all the many different resources and change our perspective, looking at it from multiple vantage points. And again, to illustrate this, I show you a work of Giuseppe Arcimboldo, 1597. It's a lovely black bowl with vegetables and nuts and greens, but the power of the painting is revealed when you turn it upside down and you see a head, you see a hat and cheeks and eyes and a nose. And what this illustrates is what the late Dr. Wayne Dyer said. He said, change the way you look at things, and the things you look at change. I'll say that again, change the way you look at things, and the things you look at change. So when it comes to anxiety and mental health issues, sometimes we have to shift our assumptions and our biases because the things we look at really change. And in a museum recently, I saw a wall text that just resonated. And I usually don't read wall texts. No offense, Michelle, to anyone in museums, but I usually save the wall text till after I look at the art. But the wall text said, how we look at things is fundamental to what we see. So thinking about our mindset and how we're looking at things is really fundamental to what we see. And to show you that one small initiative can make such a big difference, I show you the work of Jorge Mendes Blake. He's a sculptor from Mexico who decided to build a wall, all bricks, no mortar, and he put a paperback book underneath the wall. And you can see that the paperback book disrupted the symmetry of the wall, but as you get to the outer edges of the wall, you don't see the book anymore. But when you look at the entire work of art, you see that one new idea, one new approach, one new way of thinking about anxiety and the treatment of mental health issues in children can have a monumental and yet immeasurable impact. So we have to think of the idea of changing how we see things and taking changes in small, digestible bites. One of the things I heard during the pandemic that I want to conclude this part of my talk with and then take any questions is, I heard in the last 2 years, well, we're all in the same boat. The truth is, we were never in the same boat. We all have different resources and capabilities and situations. No two children, no two cases are ever exactly the same. The truth is we were all in the same storm, but that doesn't mean that we all had the same resources, capabilities, and things available to us to treat issues. So as the storm begins to abate, we need to renew our situational awareness, figure out where we are, and recognize again that we are never in the same boat. We are still not in the same boat. And we need to be able to articulate our situational awareness, where we are, to the best of our ability, what the issue is, and begin to bring in the most appropriate resources in the big picture and the small details. So I wanted to give you an overview of how I use art to broaden our vision, enhance observation, perception, and communication, and begin to solve problems, from small problems to really intractable dilemmas. And that's just a quick snapshot of my methodology. And again, it's an honor to be here, and I'd be happy to take any questions that anybody has.
Thank you so much, Amy. I mean, it's for me particularly, who's read your books, I really resonate with those aha moments. I mean, I got those aha moments just from your book, so I imagine from your workshops and hopefully even from this short share that other people will experience that. Now, I don't see any questions right away, so maybe we might wait until the end. But please, to the listeners, please do put them in the Q&A, and we'll get them to them. But if there are any whilst a panelist is speaking, you may also put it in the Q&A or raise your hand.
Can I add one thing, Tanya, just as because there are no questions, just to take an extra 30 seconds. One of the biggest problems, and I work with a lot of mental health professionals, is that we rely on recognizing patterns. And I think when I use works of art to encourage people to recognize patterns, I have to add a caveat, because patterns can establish biases and assumptions. And I just want to add the caveat that we should never let pattern recognition evolve into patterns of expectation. Just because we've seen one case, and no two children are ever the same, and no two children's situations are ever the same. And so while we need to articulate patterns that we see in art and in mental health situations, we have to be very careful that we don't let patterns of recognition emerge or evolve into patterns of expectation.
Got it. Thank you very much. Oh, let me just actually, Amy said there are a couple of questions.
Great.
So this question is: what are the common problems encountered by children with the arts?
What I'm going to say is, while I don't engage, I teach mostly adults to use art for observation skills, but I was a museum educator for many years. And what children don't really have inhibitions the way adults do. So the biggest issue I faced with children is getting them to articulate what they see and separating the objective from the subjective. They'll tell you how they feel about a certain painting. And I don't really think of this as a problem, but I try to teach children early on, there's a difference between saying what you see and saying what you think, because later in life, they have to distinguish between the objective and the subjective. And when it comes to mental health issues, that becomes a really wonderful distinction. So using art to say to children, well, this is how this painting makes you feel, but let's start by telling me what you see. And then we go into telling me, what you think about it, what you feel. And this is applicable to music, and it's applicable to dance, especially, in dance, when children say, well, I don't want to do that. It makes me feel silly. Well, why does it make you feel silly? So, how do we use the arts to dismantle children's inhibitions? And I think the skills of getting them to distinguish between what they see and what they think are very important.
Yeah. Okay. Very nice. Thank you. One more question from Yok in Singapore. How do we get parents to engage homeroom teachers and peers to engage with their child going through mental issues?
Once again, I'm going to put this in the bucket of observations, that the best way to engage people is to enable them to use the resources they have, and the resources they all have. One resource that's common among everyone is their sense of observation. So to say to a homeroom teacher, my child is suffering through, a difficult period with mental, issues right now. This is what we've observed at home, and we'd appreciate if you could recount to us your observations in the classroom. And so if the teacher is willing to engage with you, don't put more on their plate. Just say, we'd appreciate your observations of a situation. And that way you're not burdening them, but you're alerting them to a situation and just asking them to take an extra look, to do the pause that I spoke about, to think about the big picture and the small details, and to engage with you that way. Everyone has a sense of observation.
Fantastic. Thank you. Okay, there are quite a few questions coming in. A teacher is asking for signs of indications of anxiety or depression. Now, we're not going, because we're not mental health experts here. However, that being said, I did do an interview with a mental health expert, and we will put the link in the chat function, and she does talk about what are the indications. So that you can watch the video for that. Okay, hello, Amy. If no two children are facing the same problem, how should we prepare resources to help our children? I think
it's a very good question. And it goes back to my Venetian mask picture about the big picture and the small details, because the small details of each child and the particular issues he or she is facing or they are facing are very different. But again, to open the door to productive dialogue and communication, I think is step one in any situation, whether it's with the mental health experts or with the children or with the teachers. Remove the inhibitions of people, just as we did now. I'm not a mental health expert. My expertise is in art history and looking at works of art. So when you open up the communication and say, we're interested in your observations, we need to prepare people to engage them should a crisis or a situation arise, but let's lay the groundwork with everybody. Do the best you can with the resources that you have, is what I always say, so that when a crisis does happen, and this is across the professional spectrum, you're prepared with your resources. You've laid the groundwork. This is my situation. I have a class of 25 students. I've noticed this with 16 of them. I've noticed this with this, and sort of lay the groundwork when you have the opportunity, use the resources that are available, so that should a crisis arise or different resources, you've opened up your channels of communication using your observation and, most importantly, your communication skills.
Thank you, Amy. For a very different perspective, we're going to move on to Jim, the illustrator. He's from a creator perspective, I would say. So Jim was invited to illustrate anxiety, and I'm going to hand over to you now, Jim.
Okay, thanks very much. So first thing to say is that I'm in the staff room at the University of Brighton, and I'm not the only person that uses this room, so there might be some sounds in the background that aren't me, which is just the first thing to say. And I will now share my screen. Okay. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So yes, I'm an illustrator, and I'm also kind of an artist and a musician. I do lots of different things. I'm also an educator, so I teach at the University of Brighton on the second year of the illustration BA here, and I am a person that suffers from anxiety and depression and a range of other things that sort of get in the way of being a normal person, or a can't remember what the street slang for a normal person is now, but there is a word for it. It's like a normie or something. Anyway, I bought this jumper from a supermarket here in the UK called Marks and Spencer's, and they don't really do clothes. They do sandwiches and fruit and smoothies and things like that, but occasionally they sell quite fun clothes, and I bought this as an ironic gesture. I wear it all the time. It feels like an instruction to have a bright state of mind, or I don't know if it's an instruction to have a bright state of mind or to convey to others that I'm currently experiencing a bright state of mind. Either way, I just thought it was hilarious, so I wear it all the time. And I am quite a sort of an impulsive collector of imagery that inspires me or does something in my head that excites me, or says something to me, or it's usually things that are on the verge between childlike and dreamlike and humorous and quite sort of sinister and odd and disturbing. I just seem to be attracted to those sorts of images. I think because I just find them entertaining, and they inform my work quite a lot. So this is my sketchbook. I have a sketchbook that I keep regularly. I have it on me all the time. It's here, in fact. And it's kind of a collection of things that I'm thinking. So there's usually I write things that lyrics from songs or things I hear people say, or things I see written on storefronts, or like there is an observation there that says subcultural hematoma, which is my devastation at the fact that there's no real subcultures anymore, not in the same way that there used to be. Or there's a portrait of Dr. Phil there. I find Dr. Phil to be a fascinating human being. I mean, all the things that I see, think, hear. Sometimes I do little comic strips that help me to understand what's happening in my head. Or sometimes I just sometimes it's like a form of meditation, like a way of distracting myself from like a cyclical way of thinking about certain problems or issues that I find difficult to overcome. So my sketchbook is a form of therapy, basically. And then occasionally my sketchbook informs other pieces of work. So this was a little animation that I made in celebration of completing a sketchbook, which I do usually about once a year, finish a sketchbook. And so it seems like an important part of my process to do something with that. But essentially, oh, my computer's doing the spinning wheel of death. My job is kind of stressful because it's so difficult to predict. It's so difficult to predict. You don't know if you're going to get work, and if you do, you don't know what that work is going to be. So it can be quite laborious and boring, like the job that I'm showing you now, where there's a whole process of going through sketches because the person who is commissioning you wants to know that you're going to be able to do the job properly before you've even started. And then occasionally there's jobs that are even more restrictive than that, where the sketching process takes a really long time, and through the sketching process you basically see the raw version of your idea, your creative vision. You see it slowly get all the edges shaved off of it until it's more palatable and something that lots of people will like, instead of just you. So my job is, there's a constant difficult balance between doing what other people are asking you to do correctly and doing something that you want to do. And that's why I balance my workload between commissioned projects like the last image and personal projects like this one, where I made a collection of songs and put together a record, and then did some promotional material. And this is all promotional material now. So it's difficult because I'm constantly trying to find ways to do the work that I really want to do. That is quite, I don't really know what it's about or why I want to do it, or what it, sometimes it's difficult to even know what the point of doing that work is, but it needs to be done, because if I don't do this work, I become extremely depressed, and then the whole loop begins again. So anxiety is a source of fuel for me, really. I've learnt to accept it as something that pushes me forward. It's almost like a desperate fear a desperate fear of not trying to visualize my thoughts and feelings as I think them and feel them. And without my anxiety, I think I would, well, I know I would probably do much less work. I might be a slightly, or maybe even much more happier person. I might be a very content person. if I didn't have my anxiety or my depression, but I wouldn't do as much work. And I'm not sure how happy I would be if I didn't do as much work. So that's a conundrum too. Um, how long have I been talking? It feels like I've been talking about 45 minutes. Have I got time?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. So, well, now it's just like going through some projects basically. So it might be best to stop here and take some questions if there are any, rather than just keep showing you stuff that I've made, but sometimes for no reason. So shall I stop? Can I stop there, or should I just keep
Yes,
showing you
of
stuff?
course you can. And I think later Steve will share the work that you did for the anxiety issue of EYEYAH.
Great.
I think thanks, Jim. That was a really honest and authentic and a share, and really really interesting perspective of your anxiety as a source of fuel. I thought that was really fantastic, and I imagine it's really quite well, it's really quite inspiring. So there's a few questions. So Kay is asking, how do you declutter your mind and put them into art?
Um, well, it's not really. So the implication there is that there is this clutter that you systematically tidy, and that unfortunately it doesn't work like that at all. The clutter should be. So when I think of clutter, I think of like a desk with lots of stuff on it. It's more like a whirlwind that's filled with cars and cows and jagged pieces of metal and donuts and people, and you basically just have to focus on one bit at a time, and occasionally you can mix bits up, which, so you can, if like today for example, I was on the train and I was thinking about money. I was thinking about a song that I'm writing. I was thinking about my parents. I was thinking about the summer, like what am I going to do for the summer holidays, all of this stuff. And what I ended up drawing was the sun with a sad face, kind of um, making a list. So the 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 thing that the way that I dismantled the clutter was to just pass all the responsibility of the clutter onto this drawing of a sun and let him figure it out. So it's you have to like you have to you have to recognize that there is clutter, recognize that it's stressful, but then you sort of have to take the importance away from it so that you can react to it in a way that's enjoyable. If you can figure out a way to react to whatever is going on in your mind and make it fun, then the decluttering process doesn't even seem like work. It's just something that you're continuously and constantly doing.
Thank you, Jim. Can you see the questions, the Q&A, Jim? Because I thought maybe you could, you can't see them?
I can if
I
I
could
stop
see
sharing my
Michelle
screen.
shaking.
I can, yeah. How do you declutter your mind and put
Do
them
you
into
want to pick? Yeah, do you want to pick which one you want to answer live and which ones you want to type? I think it's probably better you do that.
Yeah, I can probably answer them all if I'm fast. Hi Jim, how long do you take to complete one illustration? Completely depends on the illustration. If it's something that I want to do myself, uh, I it can take as long as I want because no one's asking me to do it. If there's someone asking me to do it and I'm getting paid for it, I'll do it in the amount of time that they ask me to do it in, because if I don't get paid. Next question. Hi Jim, what are the main intentions of your art pieces to the audience? Oh, that's a good question. Well, I don't know if I think about that too much, because if I did, I think it would stress me out to the point of being catatonic. I think it it behooves me to be self-involved and selfish, unfortunately, because if I think about how people react to my work, then I start taking their reactions and their needs and their their reactions. I start to take it all into account, and then I'm trying to do things for other people, and that leads nowhere good, I don't think. So I suppose the main thing that I want to show is a sense of fun. I liked at the beginning what you said, Tanya, that my stuff makes you smile, but it's full of anxiety. I think I'm interested in that balance between, like I said before, kind of childlike joy and disturbing reality. I think there's crossovers all the time, and I like to put that into my work quite a lot. Does your state of mind affect the choice of colors in your work? No, don't think so. It's usually what affects my choice of colors is what pens are in front of me. I do have rules and patterns and routines when I'm coloring things in. I like to make sure that wherever there is a line between one color and the next, those two colors should be contrasting and jarring, and they shouldn't ever feel like they belong together. Hi, Jim. Are there times where anxiety and depression gets in the way of creating, and what do you do in those situations? Yes, there are. What do I do in those situations? What I should do is stop and go and take a walk and get some fresh air. What I tend to do, unfortunately, is just power through until I feel like I'm all right again, which makes my depression and anxiety worse. So I am in the process of learning how to take a break when I feel like things are starting to fall apart slightly. But that's a really hard thing to do, because what it feels like is, oh no, there's a problem. That problem needs as much of my attention and time and energy as I can possibly give it. Otherwise, it will never be fixed. That's what it currently feels like. But really, what I've got to learn to do is say, oh no, there's a problem. Now I need to stop because I'm seeing problems where there probably aren't any. So that's easier said than done. Do you know or remember if you were anxious as a child? Is it something that you've only realized as an adult? Was art always a channel for your anxiety, or did it manifest in other forms of expression as a child? I don't remember being a child at all, thankfully. But I'm pretty sure that it was there. I was bullied. I wasn't very popular. I spent a lot of time on my own, so made a lot of art consequently. I don't think I knew that I was experiencing anxiety or depression, for that matter. But yeah, I think it was definitely there. Hello, Jim. What is one advice you would give to anxious and perfectionist teenagers who use art as an outlet, but at the same time are super anxious about making mistakes? Yeah, good question. So I would suggest to that teenager to stop looking at social media and Instagram, because I think what most teenagers and young people do these days is that they are laboring under the misconception that looking at Instagram is a form of inspiration, and actually it's more likely to be a form of crippling. You're basically going to look at the perfected work of people who are doing what you want to do, without seeing the mistakes or the anxiety or the depression that is definitely there. And that's the whole point of Instagram and social media, to make your life look perfect and effortless. So that's the first thing I would suggest. Don't look at that anymore. Don't look at anything that is illustration related, really. Look to fine art or films, or listen to music, read books, and don't see mistakes as mistakes. The best thing that I can suggest is, if you are doing a drawing and it goes wrong, turn that mistake into something that you can color in black. That's what I do. Mistakes are just like forks in the road. They're not dead ends. There's one more question. Sorry, this is going on quite a long time, isn't it? There's a blurring of the boundaries between healthy stress and unhealthy anxiety. Is there? Many people, students, seem to perceive of stress as anxiety, mental health issues. How do we differentiate, help our students differentiate between them? I don't know. I think the best thing to do is just to talk to them and see how they're feeling. And I mean, everyone experiences stress and anxiety, I suppose, at different levels. But it just depends. I think for me, it just depends how you how much time you spend focusing on it. I mean, the obvious thing that happens when people are depressed and anxious is that you have a tendency to slip into a victim mentality quite quickly. And I think that that's always extremely unhealthy and problematic. So not I'm not sure how important it is to differentiate between the different types of anxiety and depression. They're all problematic, but you know, just see them. I mean, it's if you're experiencing depression and anxiety, it's not like your life is over. Essentially, you're just experiencing anxiety and depression. So you've got to figure out what to do with that. I decided to use it. Otherwise, the other option would have been much less productive.
Thank you, Jim. I'll just to quickly add to that. I think the answer to that is also education and talking about mental health in the classroom and explaining to kids the difference between stress, anxiety, positive anxiety. So that's something that we've tried to do in our in our educator kit. So just to finish that off. So thank you, Jim. That was a really rich and honest and discussion. Thank you so much. I think it would be so inspiring for young kids to listen to you talk. So next, we're going to go on to Michelle, who's Director of Education, and she's now in New Orleans, and she's at the North Carolina Museum of Art. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you. Good morning from the East Coast of the United States. I'm here in New Orleans just for a short trip, but I'm normally in Raleigh, North Carolina, both on the East Coast. And my background, I want to actually I've added even some slides and notes from listening to our last two speakers. I've really enjoyed it. And I want to follow Jim's lead in sharing just a moment of my vulnerability. Is that during the pandemic, I found myself having such high levels of anxiety. I am a former teacher, but I have two sons that are teenage sons, and just my own stress of managing when they went remote at the beginning of the pandemic and trying to save jobs within my museum and just manage everything. I found that I've probably been managing some level of anxiety for most of my life. And now both some of my family and I are on medications, but I've also learned a lot of strategies. So I'm sharing some of this not only from like that professional point of view, but I can definitely see the impact of this personally. And I was talking to my team. So I manage the education team at the North Carolina Museum of Art. It is a state-funded museum, so it means that we are for the people, it's free admission, and my mandate is to increase access to this collection across our state, which is about a 7-hour drive from one end to the other. And I'm excited to see in the audience that we have at least one of our North Carolina educators that have joined us today, Beth Palmer. Recognize a couple other names as well. But one of the things that we began doing pretty early on in the pandemic, and even I want to take just a moment too to something Amy said about wall labels and text. And this is going to allow me to test the chat window for the next little interactivity, because as a teacher, I want your input for the activity that we're about to do. Is just coming to museums and talking about art sometimes can create a high level of anxiety for people. My team was talking about yesterday that talking about art with teachers to address anxiety in the teacher workshops we've done has created anxiety for them because they're so worried about making mistakes. So in the chat window, if you don't mind testing this feature, I would love to hear from you. How would you rank your comfort level when you come to a gallery or museum? Does that idea relax you? or does it stress you out just a little bit? So with 0 being low and 5 being super high. I'm interested to see too how the chat window works when we've got a bunch of people. See, this is what I was expecting. A nice range. And just to address something Amy said, do you feel comfortable looking at art without going to that label first? I'll give you a second or two to think of that. Interesting. Yes, 5s, some 1s still. A museum educator, yes. It's a learned skill. When I see that she's a museum educator, coming from the classroom after 13 years teaching art to middle and high school students, I excelled in as a studio artist, connecting students in the process of making art, but leading through a student-led inquiry-based discussion about a work of art, especially a work of art that addresses some challenging issues, was something that I have learned a great deal in my current position. I didn't have as a classroom teacher. And the last question is, I generally look at a work of art for less than 30 seconds before moving on. There's been a great deal of research about how much time someone spends with one work of art. So do you, when you go to a gallery or any other place, even the public art in your environment, how often do you stop to really spend more than 30 seconds with it? And just discussing those answers could lead us to hearing more about your background and what influenced your background to give you comfort or feelings of discomfort with that, and recognizing and acknowledging that for your students. This is so interesting to me, because I did not visit an art museum until I was a college student. And I grew up 30 minutes from the museum where I currently work. When I taught middle and high school students and brought my students on field trips, many of these students lived walking distance in downtown Raleigh from great contemporary art galleries and museums, but they never felt comfortable walking inside those spaces. So there's lots of barriers that impact this level of comfort and anxiety for students. What I want to model with you today is one of the strategies that I developed this at the beginning. We have lots of strategies about talking about art. So I wanted to take a moment from theory and model something where for a minute, you're going to be the students and we're going to engage with the work of art. Then I'm going to break the third wall and we're going to unpack this as if we were an educator. And I'm also going to time myself so that way I'm making sure that I don't go over my time. I get so excited talking to people about art. So I want you to take a minute or two with this work of art and look closely. As Amy said, pause and take it in. And I'm going to give you a minute to do that. And without knowing anything about this work of art, without me sharing context about the artist's process or historical context, we're going to talk about this work of art using a strategy that I've borrowed from the therapy world. It's a strategy that therapists use with children to help them develop mindfulness. One of the things when you're dealing with anxiety is this idea of being overwhelmed and being flooded with emotions that you're unable to control. So we're going to practice using something that therapists call 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So you can write down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, or if you feel comfortable, since so many of you do, we may even use this in the chat window. So I'm going to ask for you to name 5 things that you see in this picture. Okay, what are 5 things if you're looking closely? And I'll blow it up in just a minute. I just want to walk you through the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. What are 5 things you can name? Naming is important. And when you're talking about these works of art, naming is a great place to start. 4 things that you can touch. If you can imagine yourself in this setting. 3 things that you could hear if you were in this setting, 2 things that you could smell, and finally, this is where I love to use imagination with kids looking at art. What's one thing that you could taste? I changed my work of art based on Tanya's suggestion. Sometimes with works of art, you get some really interesting answers for what you could taste.
Yes.
So I'm going to give you just another second or two, and we're going to blow this up so you can look more closely. 5 things that you could see, 4 things, and I mix up the order all the time. As long as you're consistent, you're fine. 5 that you can see, 4 that you could hear, 3 things that you could, what was it, touch, 2 things that you could hear, and then taste. All right, so I want to unpack some of the things that are in the chat window. I see some really great observations. Birds, umbrellas, hats, chairs, tables, shadows. Now, someone said shadows. If I was with a group of students, we might unpack some of these things. Where do you see some shadows? Where do you see, where a page turning? Oh, you see somebody here with a book that someone looks like that they may be holding a book and turning in the action of turning a page. Someone would hear wind and bugs. So there's a lot of contextual clues that are coming about in this discussion. And for me to only talk about a work of art for 4 minutes is always a disservice. But I want to, for the point of this, break that third wall and unpack this a little bit. This is a strategy that we've posted on our website. I actually have a video where I'm walking through about 5 minutes of this. And I've done this strategy with this work of art. I first modeled it with some preschool families last year in the pandemic, and came back to some of those families several months later to ask, has this had any impact? Did y'all ever use this strategy again? And one mother said that on a vacation, her son, 7 years old, that was having some level of anxiety, was just having a temper tantrum out at a restaurant, and just having that sense of flooding that we were talking about. And she used this strategy to help him ground himself in this moment of what he could see around it. So even though we're using, I believe, my team believes that you can use works of art to learn about anything in the world and more about ourselves. Here we're using it to model strategies that can develop more mindfulness. Now, even though I borrowed this one from the therapy field, I believe that, and I keep coming back to some of the many things that Amy said, I feel that close looking, pausing, and taking that moment, because just with images, if we think about how often every day we are flooded with visual images, that to take a moment and actually pause and look and to unpack what we see, that is a skill that, even if I didn't share anything about this artist, who is an American impressionist, spent time in Giverny, but for this particular exercise and many in your classroom, that information might not be important for what you're teaching. This might be a warm-up that you do every day or something else. And if you come back to this work of art later on in the year or during another unit where you might be exploring weather or something else, then they've had an anchor and they can make those connections. So what I'm saying is that even the strategies that you use when you're talking with students to first, and I want to go back to a question asked, I think, to Amy about when you have so many students and every student is different, how do you approach that? By really letting students lead that conversation, they're constructing their meaning. You can guide them, especially with some more difficult works of art of artists that are expressing, artists of color that are expressing some their lived experiences with racism and trauma. Sometimes I find that I didn't spend a lot of time doing it with you, but when I am modeling these strategies in a gallery, I might paraphrase and bring out some methods of like what in the image makes you say that. Just to go back to what Amy was talking about, what you see and what you think, that sometimes they go to those patterns that they have in their head. And we just need to help them to, well, let's spend a little bit more on this. What evidence, this is why visual literacy is so important, because we're teaching them literacy through art. We're teaching them literacy through an image. And you can take this same idea to any visual image, photographs, cartoons, primary text documents, but we're getting them to slow down and ground their thoughts in their observations. So what referenced earlier about mindfulness and everything, our museum is, our approach to what we're doing is heavily rooted in social emotional learning. And this is a framework, at least here in the States, that we've heard much more about since the pandemic and pandemic recovery efforts have really focused on this. And this is, they're called CASEL. They're out of California, the Center for Academic and Social Emotional Learning. They've been around for over 30 years, publishing research about educating to the whole child. But now we're looking at just how important that is to help students to move past this point that we find ourselves in history. And the particular strategies that I'm talking about go into self-management, which is about like regulating your emotions. But we feel that you can use works of art as a catalyst for discussion for all of these different things. And there's different strategies that match up to help hit that. And just without getting into the overwhelming details of it all, this sort of breaks out what each of those areas own CASEL's framework mean. And again, I don't represent CASEL, but this has been a huge influence as far as our research recently in addressing how we're thinking about works of art. And I'll include my link to our education website in the chat window, as well as my email address and Twitter handle. And I am very open to answering questions.
Wow, Michelle, that was a wonderful, really. I mean, that framework is fantastic, and I think all of us on this panel. I mean, I know Ayn as well, who's a teacher, really relates to that power of observation and learning to look at art to uncover all those benefits, the social emotional learning. You know, so that was quite a powerful framework, and the questioning is. Yeah, I can imagine that it would be such a fun thing to do in a classroom, also to hear the perspective from different people. I think that's why it was nice to see in the chat. You really, different people will see different things.
Absolutely. And I think too that focusing on the discussion of the work of art and just that close looking and guiding them through that there's several strategies that help do that. But the idea is you don't have, I believe that everyone can learn about art. I am a lifelong learner, and I'm really interested in learning more about Jim's work after this presentation. But you don't have to have the anxiety that I don't know a lot about art to be able to talk about works of art, or that your opinion is going to influence them if it's something, you know, someone doesn't like. Works of art that trigger a lot of emotions and dislike are some of the most impactful works of art to discuss with a group, as that can uncover a lot of thoughts and feelings as we're really looking and talking about what it is in that image that sparks something for me that I have such a strong response for. There's some really interesting things to do from that. Yeah.
I tell you what, I've got a question. I don't see anyone's got questions yet. That technique that you used, do you use the same technique on different works of art, or do you use different techniques, the questioning technique?
Yes. So this particular coping strategy, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, is probably one of 20 or 30 discussion strategies that we have on our website. That and we actually also have online courses for teachers. We have one for using art for social emotional learning strategies that's about to start, and one for one for visual literacy that it models many other strategies. But this particular one I found works best for really vivid images that have sensory details. Like I might not use this for a modern abstract work of art. I might find something I see, I think, I wonder, which is very similar to something, it's a Harvard Project Zero strategy that Amy might have even been alluding to earlier when she was talking about seeing and thinking. But I feel like that this works really great for landscapes, especially. There is one question, how have your students usually responded, and what would you envision from the art sessions and the intentions? We have used a similar, we've used this 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 method. We have virtual field trips. So much like Amy, most of my audience, I do work with students directly at least once or twice a month. But most of the audiences that I engage with are adults and teachers, and my team, supporting my the team I supervise. So we have seen in our virtual field trips a really warm response to this. What I really feel like you have to emphasize is, how would you use this in a regular setting? How would you, the application of it? So if you are finding yourself in the middle of a test, to take a moment and stop and do 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 yourself. Ground yourself, take a moment and breathe, and then name 5 things around you. Right now I see the ceiling, a light, a refrigerator, and name these things. And then in the process of naming, you're literally aware of your environment and grounding yourself in this moment, rather than all of those thoughts that, like Jim said, it's like a tornado. It's swirling through your head. It's not just clutter to unpack. It's just like a storm that comes at you. So you're quieting the storm to process my next step, where I am now. So I feel that so far we've had a really positive response, and we've been doing this now for about a year, and actually almost 2 years. So with this particular strategy. I'll put the link for this in the chat window, and would be happy. I'll continue to keep my eye on there is one more question. What are the possible reasons if people feel uncomfortable going into an art museum? I'd love to turn that to the chat if possible. For those, there were many people that said they felt uncomfortable. Why do you feel uncomfortable going to an art museum? I'll share what I have heard. I asked my family, why we went to museums, and they even gave me, we didn't have art in the schools in rural North Carolina for many years. So I didn't have an art teacher until high school. And art museums just seemed like a place they didn't go. It was a sort of a elitist, fancy place that you needed to be within, maybe certain circles to be able to go and feel comfortable there. I know that some of my students from inner city Raleigh, is a small city, but they felt watched and felt that people they were never able to relax from the moment they walked in with the rules and the security officers. So I think that I would be curious if some of the ones that felt comfortable grew up going to museums where that was encouraged, or they were exposed to museums and galleries at a young age with teachers and field trips. So I think that some of this is just that discomfort from what's unknown, and some of it is that many museums are not very welcoming, inclusive environments, and many of us are working to change that. So it's a layered question, but yes, hope I tried to answer it. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you, Michelle. And I think there's some interesting things, especially from the artists amongst the group. So Michelle, we're going to move on. Thank you so much to Ayn, who's an art teacher here in Singapore. So please go ahead.
Okay, let me just share my screen for a bit. Okie dokes. So hi everyone, my name is Ayn and I'm an art teacher. So I've been teaching in primary schools for about 10 years now. And my students make me feel both old and young at the same time. Okay, so I'd like to thank Tanya and EYEYAH Magazine for inviting me to be on such an esteemed panel. If I seem nervous, that's because I am. Deep breath. Okay, so for my sharing tonight, I'll be focusing on 4 ways you can address anxiety in the art classroom. And these are activities that I have tried with my own students, and they have transformed my classroom into one that nurtures open, empathetic, creative thinkers who have a joy for learning. And these activities can also be easily transferred to other settings like in an art museum or even at home with your own kids. Okay, so I like to start with a simple exercise that I do with my students every morning. So part of their morning routine includes mindful breathing, where we focus on taking deep breath. And this is going back to what Michelle was saying about taking that mindful moment. So research has shown there are multiple benefits to mindful breathing, like reducing anxiety, regulating our nervous system, and increasing focus. So I use this comic by a local illustrator, Pixin, as it presents serious information in a fun and humorous way. My students love this comic so much because it's so funny. And I'm going to zoom in so that we can all look at it together and follow the steps together. So we're going to do mindful breathing for the next couple of minutes. So let me zoom in a little bit. Okay. So let's try some diaphragmatic breathing. I love the second panel. No, I mean the other one, the breathing. Okay, so we're gonna do some breathing right now because sometimes we're so busy and stressed we forget to take deep breaths. And in the second row, are you ready? I have been ready since you mentioned the word breathing. Okay, so we're gonna do this. Step number 1, hand on your chest, other hand on your belly. Everyone inhale through your nose, making sure the hand on your belly rises more than the hand on your chest. And we're gonna slowly exhale through your mouth, and you're gonna purse your lips like a little fish while exhaling. And we're gonna do this for maybe 30 seconds. Okay, thank you everyone for participating in the mindful breathing activity. So now that we're all calm and focused, let's talk about anxiety. Okay, so how are children's mental health during this pandemic? That's the main question that I'm focusing on. And why is it important that we talk about it now? Well, schools have always been stressful for most students, but especially during this pandemic, students are struggling to cope with increasing stress, anxiety, and worry. And there's a recent article from the Sydney Morning Herald that highlighted the pandemic's staggering mental toll on young Australians and called it an urgent national priority. So let's take a look and unpack what are children anxious about. And these are the answers from my students when I asked them. And they basically fall into 4 categories: the pressure to succeed from exams, extracurricular activities or high parental expectations, relationship issues with their families and friends, the prolonged pandemic, where they are uncertain of how the future will look, and especially social media. And I know Jim mentioned something about Instagram, not going on Instagram or TikTok because of this unrealistic expectations of success or beauty standards and perceived popularity that social media has, and that it affects the kids. So how can we engage children in discussions about these issues that I've listed here in a fun and meaningful way, while also developing their creative and critical thinking skills at the same time? Like all the speakers before me who has been mentioning, we use art to talk about all that. So by using artworks, illustration, other forms of visual media, we spark open, honest conversations about the children's experiences and emotions. And we need to equip children with the tools to help them make sense and navigate the highly visual and increasingly digital world that we live in. And that's where visual literacy comes in. So I'm tapping on to what Amy said about moving from objective to subjective and how we look at art. So this is a thinking routine that I do in class to develop my students' visual literacy. So they do something called See, Think, Wonder. I'm just going to zoom in so you can see the kind of questions that they have. So this is based on Botero's Bronze the Bird. So the kind of questions that we ask them as they are observing the artwork critically and quietly: what do you see in the artwork? What colors are used? What's happening in the artwork? So we focus on what they see just on the surface, and then we move on to their own perceptions, their own interpretations and questions that they have. So in the second column, in the think, number 2, I like it because the bird is cute like me. So very, very cute answer, and she is very cute, the student. Okay, and in the wonder column, the artwork makes me feel happy because I like strange and cool artwork. So I love how this student is asserting what she likes and she's sharing it with me. All right, so I'm going to move on to the second one. So students observe this artwork with a critical eye, and they make thoughtful observations based on visual clues, and they also engage more deeply, and they analyze more thoughtfully the images that they are viewing. So if you take a look at the very last column here, at the wonder column, and if you take a while to read the student's reply, the questions in the column has triggered an emotional response from the student. So it says here, I think it's very difficult because you need to know how to build it, how many places you have, as in where you should place it, the budget, and some people may dislike your artwork and may say mean things to the artist, and you must have a lot of perseverance, which is one of our school values. Okay, so with that in mind, after I've read that response, you can then follow up with an open-ended discussion, either one-on-one with the student or opening it up to the class on their own personal experiences where they have been hurt by mean comments about their artworks from their family members or from their friends or classmates. And then you can also get them to share the ways to overcome that hurt or anxiety of such occurrences and how to stand up for themselves. All right, so another activity that I do with my students is an emotional check-in, which helps them to label and validate their feelings. And this activity also fosters social emotional competencies such as self-awareness and self-management, like what Michelle was talking about. Again, using art as a way to develop these SEL competencies is very, very important. So I get them to draw because it's more fun and it's easier. It's less stressful for them to doodle. And I use this activity from a game called We're Not Really Strangers, where I set the timer for a minute and they just keep their pen on paper till the time runs out, not to overthink, just to write down whatever that they were feeling. So I'm going to show you my students' doodles right now. So we have sleepy, tired, bored. My favorite is the one with the head on the table and the chair. That is funny and sad at the same time. So we also have positive emotions, excited for the new term because they're learning something new in math, or because it's with me, the art teacher, because this student looks forward to art lesson. We have mixed emotion where the students are confused. They're both happy and sad, or okay, but sad, have to go back to school. And I love the one that's on the left as well. It's very, very complicated, and the student has even included a legend at the bottom that clearly defines all the different emotions that the student is feeling. And lastly, anxiety as well, like the one on the right, the sweaty, stressed emoji that's feeling mild pain because the holidays are over and being worried about exams. All right, last but not least, I'm going to share with you one of the best ways to address anxiety in the classroom is to introduce a diverse range of images, whether they are artworks, books, illustrations, comics, GIFs, and you need to be intentional in bringing in contemporary and multicultural resources to deal with the issues that the children care about. For example, let me zoom in, you can go on to Instagram to show students artwork from the COVID Art Museum, which is the world's first museum for art made during this pandemic, as COVID-19 is one of the main reasons why students are anxious about. So showing them the artworks, the things that people have created from such a bad experience, not only will inspire them to create artworks of their own, but it will also make them feel more connected to others during these unprecedented times. Okay, or you can use illustrations from magazines such as EYEYAH. So this is one of the activity pages. When you want to talk about issues such as social media, like what you see online is not everything. There are fake news, unrealistic beauty standards, which will affect their self-esteem, self-confidence. Or you can talk about, include picture books, like this one, Why Do I Feel Like This by Shinsuke Yoshitake. Actually, he's one of my favorite book illustrators and authors, and I frequently use his book in my lessons. In fact, there's someone else on this panel who's also a huge fan. Hi, Angie. I'm talking about Shinsuke. And I'd like to share with you my favorite page from this book because I love how he has visualized bad feelings. So I'm going to give you a moment to just read these 2 pages. So his art is a little bit like what Jim was talking about, a mix of childlike joy and disturbing reality. So we have all this, we have our main character who's having bad feelings clinging onto to her body. And if you look on the page on the right, there are different sizes, multiple ones as well, clinging to different parts of the body. And Yoshitake is such a master of thoughtfully introducing an abstract idea, in this case, bad feelings, and recasting it in a very approachable, humorous way that the students enjoy. Okay. So inspired by his bad feelings creatures in his book, so I got the students to create what they think their bad feelings would look like. So I added an element of fun and creativity, and I wanted to generate collaborative compositions. So I introduced a surrealist game called Exquisite Corpse, and it's a game where each participant first takes turns to draw on a sheet of paper, and then they fold it to conceal it and pass to the next person, and then that person will continue and contribute, and then you pass it around until the drawing is complete. And the surprise and shock on the students' faces as they open to feel the completed work of how their bad feelings creatures look like was hilarious and unforgettable. So I'm going to show you a couple over here with feeling very confused with a t-shirt that says help. We have a couple ones that looks like Medusa. A mix of a pirate and a cute one. When I asked the student, the head looks like a dumpling, and she said, I was thinking of dumplings because I was hungry, Miss Ain. Okay, so to summarize my very short sharing, the 4 ways that I've shared with you of how you can introduce and talk about anxiety in the classroom is to establish a calm and conducive classroom environment for learning first. That's the most important thing, because if you do not have this, then everything else will not be will not work. Okay, and you can do that by doing mindful breathing. Next is using thinking routines like seating, wonder, or like what Michelle shared about 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, which is amazing, and I can't wait to share it and do it in my class. That can engage students in open-ended discussions about the images that they are viewing and how it makes them feel. Next is to craft meaningful activities that allow students to develop their social emotional competencies. For example, the very, very quick but really powerful check-in doodles that I do at the start of every term and after a long holiday. And last but not least, to incorporate fun and games. Jokes are really cool. Students love jokes. Right? So you can share that with a surrealist game or any other games that you can think of. Okay? So I have come to the end of my sharing.
Thank you
If
so
there
much.
are any questions?
There's a question.
Okay.
If you could perhaps take one question and then type the other ones, because my time management skills are a bit lacking, and we still have Angie, and Steve's going to go quite fast. So is that okay?
Yes, that is perfectly fine. I will do that.
So you can pick one if you want, or you could just type them. It's up to you.
Okay. Due to time, I will probably type all the questions that I have.
Thank you so much.
Okay,
I mean,
no worries.
Yes, Angie, go for it.
Hi. Oh man, what an anxiety-inducing way to start my presentation. I'll try to go as quickly as I can. And thank you to Aya and Tanya for inviting me on this panel. I'm wondering what I'm doing here with all these amazing people. So I'm, off to a great start because I'm anxious about my presentation. So very on point. Let me just, share my screen and then I'll start my presentation. Is it working? Okay,
Yes.
there you go. Sorry, my computer died yesterday, so even better. I'm using like a computer I borrowed from a friend. So, hi, I am Angie and I'm an illustrator. A lot of my work is commercial illustrations like the one you see before you. I am an occasional educator and sometimes I also teach or guest lecture in tertiary institutions for youth aged around 17 to 20, but I also do workshops for adults and younger children. In my personal time, I occasionally do deep dives and research into intimidating and boring topics like political history. This work is done during our local elections, where I was trying to educate the younger generation about the political history of Singapore. So this is 5 slides out of 10, trying to condense 57 years of our parliamentary elections. I like to do topics that are like, political history, the workings of parliament, mental health treatment in Singapore, etc. So what I do is I go through what's on the right side of this slide, right? Like really boring, lots of words. I crunch through the data and then I present it in a way that's easily digestible and visually intuitive for people. So, people can use it as a springboard into further research if they choose to. So these are what I would call my public service comics for topics I think that people should have more awareness about. And I bring this up because Tanya mentioned that there are quite a few educators in the audience. And in Singapore, because of the emphasis on academic results and exams, a lot of the anxiety that the local children have are about, performance issues in their exams and, school and schooling. So having skills in visual literacy to me is not just understanding what an image is telling you, but it's also having the skills to use them to tell a story or to teach a subject, and to kind of aid children or young people in lessening the stress and anxiety of learning. So I really strongly believe in harnessing the power of cute, and I like to use bright colors and cute characters because they're usually associated with fun and harmlessness to talk about topics that are kind of serious, boring, sometimes scary and intimidating. Humor and cuteness are things that I like to use to break down barriers, especially when I'm discussing taboo subjects. I'm often told by several people that I Trojan horse them into learning because they think the illustrations are really simple and childish looking, and then they kind of learn about topics that they didn't know that they were going to learn about. So that's how I trick people into learning stuff that I care about and I want more people to care about. So this is the latest illustration I made for EYEYAH's issue on anxiety. Tanya told me to draw stuff that kids were anxious about, but as I drew it, it really became more like a nightmare scenario of all the things that I was anxious about. And the medium of art and illustration often references universal archetypes and cultural signifiers. And I love using them in my work because as Easter eggs, people can spot them, they can recognize them, and then they, put their own meanings into my work. So those of us of a certain age, we might recognize, Gulliver's Travels, the references to that, but not all of the younger generation who are raised on, classic tales. They might not like recognize it, but I think a lot of us would probably understand the feeling of being tied down and poked with, sharp objects by tiny little creatures. So other popular icons like the serpent and the apple, the clock, the skull that signifies death and decay, your endless notifications on WhatsApp. These are all things we recognize, and we do like tend to associate certain emotions and significance to them. So kind of indulge me for a minute while I talk about my latest obsession, which is Polly Pocket. And I think a lot of you will recognize this character. I put a few of these dolls in my illustration, and to me, it's kind of like a symbol of the pandemic because we're all stuck in this like tiny little capsule. We are tiny little characters living our lives in this super claustrophobic environment, and a giant hand is just manipulating us, playing with our lives. But as I was sharing this on my Instagram, right, I was fangirling. Like a very young follower told me that she didn't recognize Polly Pocket, because even though this brand is still continuing to this day, Polly is still living in a tiny box. She went through like several style evolutions from the 80s to, the 2020s. So it's really important that, as we teach the young people what's come before us, we also continue to update ourselves as time goes on, especially in this day and age of really quick bombardment of information, technology, and change. So, remember to update your visual literacy software if you're someone who works with young people. And it's not really because you want them to, it's not just because you want them to get your references. This is a slide I used to teach a workshop to a class of adolescent girls. I was showing them like my comic grades and my heroes and various ways of making a comic. And I got very lukewarm responses from them when I showed them like, Charles Barsotti, who's like a hero of mine. You're like, yeah, he's cool, haha. And then I came to the next slide, this one. Sarah Anderson is a very, very popular comic artist on social media. The girls immediately started screaming and going like, oh my God, I follow her on Instagram. She's awesome. That comic she did, blah, blah, blah. And that broke the ice in a way that the other, people that I showed couldn't. And, I think it's because it showed them that I was connected to them. And, I always knew that connection with your students or your kids is very important, but I've never experienced it so viscerally until I was in a room of, screaming teenage girls. That was really, really great. But apart from establishing a connection, I think the most important thing when you talk to youth about anxiety or mental health issues is to not pretend that you've got everything together. It's very tempting as an adult to pretend that you know what you're doing, especially in front of younger people. But it's kind of like a lie. So I do a lot of comics about my own anxieties, my depression, occasional suicidal thoughts. And so what happened after I published them was that a lot of my students felt, that they were able to talk to me very frankly about what they were feeling, right? Because I stopped being like a authority figure to them. I was also a human being who goes through like negative, sometimes depressive emotions like they do. And, they felt like, hey, you get me. I can talk to you about this. So the last point I want to make is that, one way to, not the last point, second last point that I want to make is to use memes or comics or TikTok videos. If you're not a creator yourself, there's already a lot of resources out there that you can use to springboard and start the conversation. Because I think a lot of the kids these days and the youth are they have way higher visual literacy than adults because they grew up in an environment where everything is so visual, like they've got Instagram, they've got Tumblr, TikTok, whatever. So we should be leveraging on this to, start talking about anxiety. And I think the last point I want to make is about allowing for ambiguity when you talk about mental health issues. There isn't a single way to interpret a drawing or painting or photographs. And there can be many small narratives within a larger narrative. So, who cares what the artist means, who cares about the artist statement? Because when you look at the picture, you can read the statement and be like, I don't think that's what it means, right? And I think Michelle kind of talked about it a little bit in her presentation. Because once, like as a person who creates, once I put my artwork out in the world, I don't have control over what people think about it, and I'm okay with that. In fact, I hate explaining my work because then it limits what people might think about it. So very importantly, don't put your own narratives onto their narratives. Allow the students to tell their own stories, give them the space to say it, even if it makes you really uncomfortable, even if it makes you feel like you don't know how to respond. I mean, I've had experiences where my students tell me that, they commit, like they attempted suicide. I see the marks on their skin. I see marks on their necks. I've had 2 students in one semester like attempt suicide, and then I had to talk to them afterwards. And I was scrambling. I didn't have any training. I didn't know what to say or what to do. But I think that's okay. You don't need to have all the answers. But I do think you need to kind of be able to reserve judgment and hold space for your kids. So anyways, that's the end of my presentation. I hope it made some sense, and thank you for listening. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Angie. I think a few people were disturbed. They couldn't see your face during the presentation.
Sorry.
So we look forward. I think they just want to see your nice smile.
Again.
So thank you, Angie. That was really, really lovely.
Hi.
So welcome back. So Angie, if you don't mind answering the questions in the Q&A,
hold on,
because I'm just conscious of time.
Yep. Should I type it out?
Yeah, if questions come.
Okay. Cool.
Because I just want to give Steve a very quick share, and then I will kind of wrap up for everyone. So Steve, please go ahead. And sorry to everyone for my bad time management. Are you still awake, Steve?
Yeah, I'm still here. Don't worry. And also, we're not that late, so it's okay. I'm just gonna bring up like the our latest, what we've put together for anxiety, and kind of touch on some of the things everybody spoke about. There's been a big focus on art, and I think maybe some concerns in the audience about a reliance on ability of art and things like that. Perhaps like teachers feel like they're not equipped to talk about it, or things like that. Like they're not informed enough about the subject of art to be an authority. But I think what we're trying to do here is just talk about the idea, like, the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 was a great example, because you don't need to be an authority on art to kind of break down an artwork. Sorry, I want to start on a different slide. I want to start here. And what I think what we want to do with EYEYAH as well is not sort of try and get everyone to become artists, but to get everybody to think creatively. And I think that using illustrations and art is just the best way of demonstrating how people look at the world differently. And like Angie said, what the artist intended perhaps is not important, because everybody has their own sort of different sets of interpretations when they come to a piece. But what we extract from all that is this idea of there's no right answer. And I think once you remove this need to have a right answer, it alleviates a lot of the pressure and perhaps a lot of the anxiety in a classroom. So creating kind of activities where there's no right answer, like a bad ideas session. Okay, everybody, let's think of something wild and crazy outside the bounds of reality. I think this is where children excel. And, if they don't, then we need to nurture that. And I think what tends to happen in school is, as they get older, they're less and less encouraged to kind of free think, and to their and the world's detriment, to be honest, because problem solving is literally always about looking at things in a new perspective. And I think that's what we try to do. We want you to explore different thoughts. We want you to look, we want you to observe, and observation's a word I'm really happy has kind of reappeared throughout tonight in different contexts. And being observant is a really sort of key skill in life, whether you're going to be a policeman or a bloomin', dentist or whatever. Being observant is key. In regards to anxiety, we've got a load of different subjects to cover. We offered, like in the magazine, there's gyms. We've got gyms as a coloring in, as a sort of a little art therapy that people will be able to go through. We've got these sort of coping mechanisms. I think it's standard that we should have this in there, but we're not trying to preach. We're just sort of offering little tidbits and kind of activities and thoughts that can guide people through a discussion about anxiety. So, for example, this artwork is by Lukman in Singapore. When negative thoughts start repeating, you know, and so if you start hyper-focusing on something, then try and think of something else. Try and shift your attention to something else. And that method of distraction is a tool that is used, and also this is a nice way of bringing it to the surface to talk to your students about it. We've got like things like social media, which came up tonight, more in regards to finished works and the perfect edit. And I think this idea of stop trying to be like strangers online, you know, unfollow people that make you unhappy, you know, unhealthy expectations. These types of ideas, they're relevant to the youngsters, but they're also sort of like, they're very poignant to everybody. But I think having these illustrations are really charming and inviting. And then of course you start to unravel them and start to discuss some of the things that are involved. And of course, we make these worksheets, which is a kind of two teachers toolkit to accompany the magazine, which, you know, kind of go a lot deeper. But I think just to the average kind of reader of this magazine, they're going to respond and relate to a lot of the imagery in here. Angie, you mentioned memes. You know, this idea when the teacher's looking around the classroom for one of us to answer. I think the language of memes is so important talking to young people. And of course, because it's so disposable and humorous and things like that, I feel like it does open little doorways into conversations. You know, you can ask the kids to go and find a meme how do they feel? You know, a meme which reflects their mood, and it becomes a kind of tool of expression for them. We've got these lovely illustrations, you know, and they're accompanied by not facts, but little snippets of information. So life can get a little hectic. The time to relax is when you don't have time for it. And, you know, and just trying to get these little sound bites and these little nuggets. It's quite a profound idea, but, you know, hopefully this image drives it home. Like it kind of sends the message deeper. And we are visual people, you know. I mean, we look at things, we see this as a maze, we see the chaos, we try and dial in on things that we relate to, and hopefully the outtake is that we're not alone, you know, like you're not alone, and there's kind of shared emotions and things. I mean, Jim, I'm going to show your work now. One thing we like to ask the kids is, what are you afraid of, and what's your most ridiculous fear? We're all afraid of strange things. I love this egg, looking at his existential fried egg future. And I just sort of pulled that out because it preempts what you're about to see, which is this full assault on the eyes and the brain of where do you look first? You know, I mean, okay, that, like Tanya said, there's an anxiety inherent in the work, but also just when you start to go in and you start to sort of sense that you see the humor, but also the sort of undertone of actual fears, and there's just a lot going on here. And I think screenshot this if you can, or, you know, or go to Jim's website or Instagram and just, you know, there's so much in there. It's so hard to just look at this for a few seconds and really extract everything out of it. But, you know, what am I doing? You know, the man underneath the shoe, I'm covered up by the thumbnail, sorry, on my own screen, wait. The guy gonna get plugged in, this worm melting on the light bulb. I mean, there's just a lot going on, and it's amazing. And I think, and Angie's artwork, which she just showed as well, peppered with pop culture references and kind of PSLE is the exams in Singapore. I've got a 10-year-old, and he a 10-year-old boy, and he looked at this image and he was just like, oh, I know this, there's like, what's it called, that Korean show? I've forgotten already, the not the Hunger Games, something like that. And he recognized them all. And I think when you're using a language that they understand, then the message becomes really effective. And so, yeah, I think just in terms of, this is a little sneaky peeky of the issue. This is coming out, we're getting them on Friday. We're having an exhibition to launch the issue next Friday up at Cult Cafe. And you can come up and grab an issue if you're in Singapore. If not, they're on our website as physical and ebooks. And I think, Tanya, if I've missed anything, let me know.
No, I'm going to wrap up now.
Yeah.
No,
okay,
I think
that's all. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was a really brilliant session. Thank you to those who stayed on. Thank you especially to all of you, the panelists. I have to thank Design Singapore Council, because it's thanks to them we've been able to do this and make it available for free to all teachers in Singapore. So thank you. And I really just want to wrap up by saying, I think for me, this session was so rich because of the variety of perspectives. Even though no one here is actually a mental health professional, I think we're from the creative industry. We're either creators or we work within the arts and in education and in museums. And I think what this shows is by bringing together people from different backgrounds that we can start to create connections and have conversations. And I hope this has opened the eyes or been inspiring for people from mental health, but also for people in education. And we can start to connect the dots and solve some of these problems like Amy referred to at the beginning. So yeah, thank you everybody. Thank you all the attendees for staying late, and to all you amazing panelists. Thank you, and good morning and good evening.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night.